This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Otelli Edwards, and tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's economy appears to have ended 2024 on somewhat of a high, hitting the government's 5% full-year growth target, but analysts warn that the reality may not be as bright as the numbers suggest. And at the same time, the Chinese population falls for a third straight year, posing challenges for its leaders and the economy. South Korean investigators have filed a request to extend the detention of impeached President Yoon, who has remained silent for a second day of questioning over his brief martial law bid. The Gaza ceasefire deal reportedly signed, but implementation on Sunday is uncertain as Israel's government faces a right-wing revolt. Also in East Asia tonight, Europe hoping for the best with the next U.S. administration, but fearing for the worst, a more protectionist America under Donald Trump. And an Elon Musk fan club in China, and the businessman's possible influence in the Trump administration trending on social media. We look at what's driving China's obsession with the world's richest man. Well, the Chinese economy breezed through the last quarter of 2024 and reached the 5% full-year target it had set. Well, GDP in the October to December period beat economist estimates, expanding at the quickest pace since early 2023, or 5.4%. Well, despite the better-than-expected growth numbers, analysts say that the fundamental economic picture may not be as rosy as the data suggests. CNA's Tan Su-hui explains.
The better-than-expected economic performance comes off the back of interest rate cuts, liquidity injection, and an expansion of a trade-in scheme for consumer goods. These various stimulus measures rolled out as early as September gave 2024's fourth quarter a strong push to hit overall GDP growth of 5%.
2024年国际环境呢是错综复杂，世界经济增长的动能是偏弱的。 这个地缘政治的冲突也在加剧，贸易保护主义是愈演愈烈。国内呢，这个有效需求不足，新旧动能转换这个存在阵痛，部分行业企业生产经营困难较多。在这样一个困难局面下，我国经济是顶住压力。 克服困难，经济总量实现了这个新的突破。
But economists say 2025 will likely be equally challenging, if not worse, as external demand may come under threat from trade barriers with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump set to start his second term on January 20th.
After inauguration, we are expecting a clarity in terms of the Trump trade policy that would be implemented. And the question then is how will these policies actually look like for China in terms of actually the tariff numbers or actually having actual trade bans on certain goods and goods. I think that would be the biggest challenge for China at this time.
This as other domestic challenges remain. Latest data showed property investment in China fell 10.6% in 2024, after tumbling 10.4% year-on-year in the first 11 months.
A long dark tunnel ahead with no light yet at the end of the tunnel, or at least not being seen as well. So I think that's where the challenge for the property segment is. The hope is that with the completion of existing projects, that they are actually able to look afresh and anew, but in the meantime, the challenges are still how to revitalize that confidence, and it requires a lot more, I believe, from the Chinese state. And that's why attention is now being paid towards what they will likely say in the two sessions.
Officials have already pledged for more proactive economic policies in the new year, including a moderately loose monetary policy, as well as an increase in budget deficits. The new GDP growth target for 2025 will be unveiled at the annual two sessions in March. That's when thousands of government officials will descend upon Beijing, where they discuss work reports and approve government budgets. But there are some indications that Beijing may stick to a GDP growth target of 5%, following ambitious targets set by major local level economies such as Fujian and Zhejiang province. They're aiming for growth as high as 5.5%. Earlier, it was reported that China's trade surplus reached a record high in 2024, ending the year with a good note, as exports rebounded to 10.7% from a year earlier. It's said to be driven by export front-loading ahead of Trump's inauguration. Tan Siwei, CNA, Beijing.
Right, now for how the local markets are reacting to the news, here is Roland Lim with the numbers.
Thanks, Natalie. Look at how the Greater China markets responded today to the positive economic data. Well, it was a choppy session for the Greater China markets. It started in the red but ended in the green. Shanghai Composite up 0.18% for the day. Second was Shenzhen Component 0.6% higher. And the Hang Seng Index posting its fourth straight session of gains as well. More modest reaction in the currency market. The renminbi looks likely to be setting into a small game. Traders remain cautious on the renminbi given the wide yield gap between China and the US, as well as the upcoming Trump inauguration. And for more analysis, we're joined by Gary Ng. He is senior economist at Natixis. Gary, good to have you on the show as always. Now, China came in right on the money for GDP in 2024, 5% growth. Were there any surprises today?
Well, I think the market doesn't think it's a big surprise after President Xi actually mentioned earlier that China will reach 5% last year. But of course, when you look into the market reaction, actually things hasn't really changed so much. The number hasn't really been a very big surprise. But at the end of the day, it also doesn't really bring much downside as well. And it's not really about last year, but the market is still exploring, what is going to happen next year.
Now, Gary, I just want to touch on some weak data out, anemic consumer inflation, falling tax revenue, as well as online spending. Does this all point to perhaps deflationary pressures in the economy?
Well, yes, indeed. I think this imbalance between demand and supply will still persist in 2025. And especially, we do see a divergence across different sectors that maybe on the surface side, things are doing a little bit better. But if you look at the manufacturing side, there is definitely needed for more policy support. For example, if we look at the retail sales data today, catering services is the one that has been doing much better a few months ago, but now it's decelerating. We do see some support or positive development in the policy-supported products like automobile, household appliances, etc. But in general, consumers are not really spending more than before, so people are not feeling very optimistic. And together, if we bring into other structural problems like the aging population, the weak business confidence, and also geopolitical tensions, where the companies wants to invest more and upgrade the equipment this year will be another question. So all of this pointed to the fact that, well, demand may actually still be softening this year.
So given what you've said, what's your outlook for GDP growth in 2025, assuming a best-case scenario that Beijing will actually continue with its stimulus and fiscal measures?
Well, if we look at the data that we see so far, even though things may not be doing particularly well, but there's likely to be more government support given. So our baseline scenario is that, a 4.5% growth seems to be at least the bottom line that China will achieve this year. And whether there's any further upside, for example, from the fiscal policy side or monetary policy side, will actually be rather important, because if China actually opt for cutting interest rate further, possibly by 50 basis points in 2025 full year, then it's likely that we may see a greater rebound, basically in different sectors. So I would say that if we actually see stronger policy support, China will probably still keep its around 5% growth rate target, but the ultimate number will fall somewhere around 4.8%.
Donald Trump's inauguration. In a couple of days' time, Beijing risks higher tariffs from the US if Trump actually follows through with his threats. Is Beijing prepared, do you think? How will it retaliate?
Well, there's a few ways that China can react to that, because I think one difference is versus the last Trump 1.0 era is really about China already expect what will happen, and there could be a plan B already from firms in basically diversifying its supply chain. So it's possible to see stronger China's retaliation. It could be coming from the restriction of the market access in China. China may also try to curb some of the export in the upstream sectors that it has a very big market share in the global economy. So all of these options are definitely on the table. But beyond that, I do think China will work more on the demand side in boosting its own economy, trying to facilitate this stronger domestic substitution and also subsidies towards the tech sector. And externally, China will try to explore more market beyond the US. But of course, it also comes with the assumption that the attentions only stay with the US, right? But so far, we have seen that if we look at Europe or even the global South, such as the Latin America or also other Asian countries, they are concerned about China exporting overcapacity towards the world. So China will still face difficulties in how to basically mitigate such risks. It will probably need to be done by more investment from China into all this country to create more jobs as well.
Gary, I want to talk about the yuan now, which is hovering near 16-month lows, weighed down by strong dollar, tariff threats and all of that. In your opinion, is the yuan undervalued or overvalued at this point?
If we look at the pressure that the yuan usually face, we can look at it from two angles. First, it's really about this yield differential versus the US and other countries. And right now, China has refrained from cutting interest rate more aggressively at the moment because the global environment remains rather volatile, especially from the US. But that yield divergence is there because it has already reached another high point versus the previous years. And second, it is about the confidence of the Chinese economy that whether foreign investors want to invest in this market for greater return on capital. And to that, we do see ongoing net capital outflows from some of the components like the foreign direct investment, etc. So all of these two drivers seems to point to the fact that the pressure on the currency remained rather high. So even though it may not be depreciating as much as it should be, it is probably just because the authority want to smoothen this curve along the way. So if we start to see other currency like the euro or the pounds from the UK actually depreciate further, also because of the yield divergence, I think the PBOC will actually allow the yuan to go further. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a 7.4 level versus the USD this year.
Well, we will keep a lookout for that. Gary Ng, senior economist at Natixis, thank you very much for your time. And I will be back a little later on with more business news. For now, back to you.
Well, thanks, Roland. Chat with you in a short bit. Well, I want to stay in China, where the country's population shrank for the third straight year in 2024, despite a bumper crop of births due to the Dragon Year. Now, China was once the world's most populous country, but it was overtaken by India in 2023. So the total number of people in China fell by over 1.39 million to 1.408 billion at the end of last year. That's down from the 1.410 billion recorded in 2023. Some 9 million babies were born last year. That's 520,000 more than the year before. Still, it was the second lowest number of births since 1949. Well, decades of the one-child policy, plus rising childcare costs and changing social norms have lowered China's birth rate dramatically. But Beijing has been trying to reverse the trend in recent years. Its shrinking population could eventually hurt the economy, as its aging population piles pressure on the pension system. Now, South Korean investigators are working to extend the detention of impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol. A 48-hour deadline to hold him is set to expire in hours. Mr. Yoon is refusing questioning again, despite orders from investigators. The impeached leader is in police custody for a third day after a Seoul court dismissed a petition to release him. Well, he faces charges of insurrection and abuse of power in connection with his short-lived martial law declaration last month. Mr. Yoon's lawyer said that he will not turn up for another interrogation and does not see any reason or need to respond to the questions. Investigators say Mr. Yoon also exercised his right to remain silent during a 10-hour interrogation on Wednesday. Separately, police have detained Kim Song-hoon, the acting chief of the Presidential Security Service, also known as the PSS. The agency is tasked with protecting sitting presidents. Police say Kim allegedly led efforts to block investigators from detaining President Yoon. And CNA's Grace Shin has more on the latest developments.
The anti-corruption agency says that they are nearly ready to file an arrest warrant to formally arrest Yoon within the 48-hour questioning that they have. So it was slated to expire early in the morning, but it has been pushed back to 9:05 p.m. local time. And earlier, the spokesperson for the CIO appeared in front of reporters saying that they'll submit another arrest warrant for President Yoon through the Seoul Western District Court within the 20 days that the CIO will newly have. They said only time would tell. The CIO has also forecasted that they might split the 20 days into half. So within the first 10 days, they'll try questioning, and the remaining latter 10 days, they would hand it over to the prosecutors. But we're still yet to see whether we don't know the details as to when the CIO will be filing another arrest warrant. But if this passes through, what we know for sure is that they have 20 days yet again. Confusion has been filling the air because it's the first time a sitting South Korean president has received an arrest warrant for charges like insurrection. And we've also seen that reflect in the ebbs and flows of approval ratings. So the pollster analyzed the public sentiment towards the ruling party had actually reversed back to what it was like before Yoon had imposed this martial law. And that was when approval ratings for both the Democratic Party and the PPP stayed at the late 30% rate, but very polarized. And what's adding on to this polarization is how people have been perceiving Yoon's arrest warrant case and the voices made by different sides. Those that are siding with Yoon are agreeing that the CIO's investigation is unlawful, while others sticking to the CIO are claiming that any South Korean citizen who has charges against them must be questioned.
Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, more rumblings in China's troubled real estate sector, as reports say the CEO of property developer Wang Ke has been detained. And Suzuki Motor laying out big plans, aiming to be India's top electric vehicle maker as its subsidiary launches its first EV model. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight this Friday. As promised, it is time now for a business update with Roland Lim. And Roland, I want to ask you about this major investment agreement out of Mongolia today. What's that all about?
That's right. Mongolia has signed a landmark mining deal with French nuclear giant Orano, allowing it to exploit a vast uranium deposit in its southwest. Now, France says that the move will enhance its energy independence. According to Mongolia, the deal provides for a total investment of some $1.6 billion, and its first effective production is in 2027. The Zufch Arva deposit, discovered by Orano in 2010, is one of the 10 largest in the world. It contains about 90,000 tons of uranium that will be extracted over an estimated 30 years. Production could reach about 2,500 tons per year. That's about a quarter of France's annual nuclear energy needs. Orano is 90% owned by the French state and plays a key role in sourcing uranium for the country's power plants. Shares of property developer China Vanke fell sharply today as speculation swirled over the whereabouts of its president and CEO, Zhu Xiaosheng. The Hong Kong-listed shares ending the day down 3%, having been down some 8% earlier. The Shenzhen shares closing down 3%, 3.5% that is. The declines were set off by reports in the state-run Economic Observer that public security officials have detained Mr. Zhu. The report, which was later deleted, said that Vanke may be taken over by the government and undergo reorganization. Adding more uncertainty, Mr. Chu promoted Wang Ke's rental apartments business in a social media post just earlier today. The company has not issued any statements. Some analysts believe Wang Ke's liquidity stress may be at a breaking point due to its falling contracted sales. That's a main source of its cash flow. Now, its figure for last year came in at $33.5 billion. That's 35% lower than the year before. Wang Ke has so far not defaulted on bonds, but it is holding more than $4 billion worth of bonds that are set to mature this year. Wang Ke's troubles comes as China's gloomy real estate sector is beginning to see some light. Sales of apartments in major cities, including Beijing, Shenzhen, have risen since October. New home sales also stopped falling in December for the first time in 18 months. Shares of Nintendo ending the day in the red in Tokyo by 4% after the teaser for its Switch 2 console failed to win over investors. The 2-minute trailer shows a larger device similar to the design of the original hybrid Switch, but the absence of key details such as screen specifications or price left investors disappointed. Shares fell by as much as 7% before the lunch break, stabilizing in the afternoon session. It was the sharpest fall in more than 3 months. The stakes are high for Nintendo. The Japanese company will generate around 91% of its revenue from its Switch business. Now, the first Switch console has sold more than 146 million units since its launch in 2017. And despite a new Mario Kart game being showcased, the console will face tough competition in order to match the success of the first Switch. India is set to become the global production hub for Suzuki Motors electric vehicles. This as the Japanese automaker ramps up its plans to dominate the EV market. The carmaker's chief announced a major push to expand production capacity with plans to export EVs to Europe, Japan, Africa, Southeast Asia, and beyond. This strategic move was announced today with the launch of its Maruti Suzuki. That's its first electric vehicle in India. The e-Vitara, that's a mid-sized SUV that will be produced in the western state of Gujarat and positioned as a global model. Batteries for the EVs will be sourced from Chinese supplier BYD. Highlighting India's unmatched economies of scale, Suzuki's president Toshihiro Suzuki emphasized that centralizing production in the country would allow the company to produce EVs more efficiently and competitively. Suzuki Motor plans to invest over $4 billion to double production capacity to 4 million units annually by 2031. Maruti Suzuki, long a leader in India's car market, aims to reclaim its 50% market share even as it faces increased competition from Hyundai and Tata Motors in the premium SUV segment. Chinese EV maker BYD has officially entered South Korea's passenger vehicle market, opening orders for its Atto 3 electric SUV. Priced at nearly $22,000, the Atto 3 is 20% cheaper than similar models from Hyundai and Kia. The automaker says this price reflects the vehicle's overall design and features, emphasizing affordability without sacrificing quality. The company is partnering with 6 dealers and opening 11 service centers and 15 showrooms to support its expansion. Now, BYD will begin delivering its Atto 3 next month. The Atto 3 is just the beginning. BYD plans to launch 2 additional EVs in South Korea this year. That's the Seal midsize sedan and the Sea Lion midsize SUV. The company is also exploring a hybrid model to cater to diverse consumer needs. But South Korea's EV market is facing challenges. Domestic EV sales in 2024 dropped 10% to nearly 142,000 units, impacted by inflation and concerns over battery safety after a series of EV fires last summer. BYD has given assurances that its battery technology ensures safety. And that's it for business. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, time now for another break. But coming up next on East Asia tonight, the Gaza ceasefire deal is reportedly signed, but implementation on Sunday is uncertain as Israel's government faces a right-wing revolt. And Europe hoping for the best with the next U.S. administration, but fearing for the worst, a more protectionist America under Donald Trump. watching East Asia Tonight. China's economy appears to have ended 2024 on somewhat of a high, hitting the government's 5% target. But analysts warn that the reality may not be as bright as the numbers suggest. At the same time, the Chinese population falls for a third straight year, despite a bumper crop of dragon babies last year. And South Korean investigators working to extend the detention of impeached President Yoon, who has remained silent for a second day of questioning over his brief martial law bid. Staying in South Korea, investigators have reportedly found bird feathers and blood in both engines of the Jeju air jet that crashed in South Korea last month that killed 179 people on board. That's according to Reuters, citing a source familiar with the probe. Well, South Korea's transport ministry has declined to comment on the report. Well, the ill-fated Boeing 737-800 jet made a belly landing at South Korea's Muan International Airport last month. It overshot the runway and burst into flames after hitting an embankment. Only 2 crew members at the tail end of the plane survived. 4 minutes before the crash, one of the pilots reported a bird strike and declared an emergency. The plane's 2 black boxes, which hold the answers on the cause of the disaster, stopped recording about 4 minutes before the accident. Well, this has posed a challenge for ongoing investigations. A former Transport Ministry accident investigator found it surprising that the data was missing and said it could suggest that all power, including backup, may have been cut, which is rare. The Gaza ceasefire deal has reportedly been signed in Doha by Israel and Hamas, but it is far from done. There are now worries that the agreement may not take effect on Sunday as planned. Ratification has been delayed in Israel, where the government is facing a right-wing revolt against the deal. Well, ratification votes were supposed to happen yesterday. The Prime Minister's office says the Security Cabinet vote will take place today, while the full cabinet will reportedly meet late on Saturday, after which the Times of Israel reports a 24-hour grace period will follow for opponents of the deal to petition the court. It could last until late Sunday, pushing the deals to start into Monday. And that has potential significance for the U.S. It could mean the difference between the ceasefire starting when Joe Biden is still president or when Donald Trump takes office. Both have claimed credit for the pact. Israel's hardline right-wing minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is pressuring Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reject the ceasefire or his party will resign. He claims that the deal will reward Hamas and free hundreds of murderers. He demanded Hamas be destroyed first and humanitarian aid cut off to force the release of all hostages at once. The current deal will free 33 captives in the first phase, but the fate of more than 60 others depends on further negotiations.
גם בשעה הזאת, אני עדיין קורא לראש הממשלה ואמרתי לו בשיחה בינינו, להתעשת, לא להחזיר אותנו אחורה, למנוע את העסקה הנוראית הזאת ולנקוט בצעדים שבאמת יובילו לשחרורם של החטופים ולניצחון במלחמה.
The Netanyahu government's majority in the Knesset depends largely on right-wing support. Without it, Mr. Netanyahu could face a razor-thin majority or even a minority government. Reports say the potential resignations will not stop the ceasefire deal from being ratified. Sarah Coates explains to us the delay in Israel's cabinet approving the ceasefire deal.
Well, certainly there were last-minute disagreements between Israel and Hamas. This was really revolving around the identities of these Palestinian detainees that will be released from Israeli jails. Hamas wanted to determine which people would be released. That has now been ironed out. This deal has now been signed between Israel and Hamas. That Israeli negotiating team is now on the way back for Doha ahead of this Security Cabinet meeting where this vote will happen. Now, it is expected to pass. There is that 24-hour period. That is, of course, after the full Security Cabinet meeting. Once again, it is expected to pass despite very fierce opposition from the far right here in Israel, namely the Security Minister, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and also the Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich. They are threatening to pull out of the government if this does go ahead. But in saying that, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he does have a safety net, and that is from the centrist, the opposition leader Yair Lapid. He's come out to say that he will step in to save this coalition to make sure that this deal does go ahead, although if and when it does, it will not come into effect, this ceasefire, until Monday.
Just days to go until the inauguration of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Beijing, which Washington views as its top rival, announced that it will send Vice President Han Zheng to Monday's ceremony as President Xi Jinping's special representative. Though the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that Beijing stands ready to work with the incoming U.S. government to enhance dialogue and communication, properly manage differences. And it added that China is prepared to find a right way for both countries to get along in what it calls the new era. Well, this comes as Mr. Trump named a number of China hawks to key posts, including Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. Mr. Rubio has called Beijing the biggest threat to the U.S. Well, Mr. Trump has also made known that he and Chinese President Xi Jinping have been communicating through representatives, and he is optimistic about U.S.-China ties. Well, meantime, the European Union says it's looking forward to a positive engagement with the next U.S. administration. But behind the scenes, the bloc has been preparing for months for the possibility of a more protectionist America under Donald Trump. Will Denslow has more from Brussels.
Bracing for a potentially frosty relationship. Just days before taking office, Donald Trump issued a warning to Denmark. Either the EU member state gives up the mineral resource-rich autonomous territory of Greenland or faces tariffs. The president-elect says it's a matter of national security, citing the influence of Russia and China in the region. The European Commission has poured cold water on Trump's threats, calling them hypothetical. Whether a direct threat or a shot across the bows, it's a sign the transatlantic relationship could be heading for stormy waters. One clear point of contention is defence.
It's, if I can say, pretty wild stuff to be talking about him in this way in the run-up to his taking office. I'm not sure what one makes of that exactly. I think it is it's slightly unfortunate in the context of what is a more legitimate request on the part of Washington to see Europe pay more and do more in defense.
Donald Trump wants NATO allies in Europe to pay 5% on defence, up from the current target of 2% of GDP. But many cash-strapped European governments are likely to struggle to get close to that target.
A huge question here in Brussels is what a change in administration in Washington will mean for Ukraine. Trump has called for a quick resolution to the war, and the EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas says that Europe is willing to take over leadership on the matter if the US is no longer willing to do so.
Long before November's US election, the EU had been prepping for the possibility of a Trump win. Caught off guard by tariffs on European steel and aluminium during his first term in office, the bloc is now steeling itself for a more protectionist US administration and the prospect of wide-reaching duties from its leading trade partner. The EU has already floated the idea of importing more liquefied natural gas from the US to appease Washington.
If the US is the EU's biggest trade counterparty, maybe they need to dilute that a bit, because if globalization is coming to a point where it's not quite what we've seen over the last couple of decades, people need to shift their focus and try and find new markets.
While Brussels seeks to show a united front, the 27-member bloc has grown increasingly divided, with right-wing populism on the rise. For some EU leaders, Trump's presidency is a chance to bolster influence, both domestically and on the European stage. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited the president-elect at his Florida home earlier this month.
My thinking is that Meloni might actually try to play up the US against Brussels in the near future, and the Trump camp might expect that in exchange for concessions towards Meloni.
EU leaders say they're committed to strengthening the transatlantic bond. They say Europe and the US are stronger together. Soon they'll know how that aligns with Donald Trump's philosophy of America First. William Denslow, CNA, Brussels.
And CNA will also bring you the inauguration ceremony live, alongside analysis from our correspondents and experts. So join us on the 21st of January, midnight, Singapore, Hong Kong time. Coming up on East Asia tonight, an Elon Musk fan club in China, and the businessman's possible influence in the Trump administration trending on social media. So the world's richest man has been making waves on Chinese social media as anticipation mounts over President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration next week. A celebrated icon with many Chinese fans, Tesla CEO Elon Musk has drawn interest over his role as Mr. Trump's new efficiency czar and its implications for U.S.-China relations. CNA's Lauren Ong with the story.
It's all about Elon Musk for 48-year-old Liu Jianping. Books SpaceX rocket models and quotes decorate his office in Shanghai. In his free time, he's made visits to Tesla's factories and showrooms in the city, regularly gathers with other Musk fans in person and online in a WeChat interest group with over 2,000 members. This fascination started in 2014 when Mr. Liu got his hands on one of the first Tesla electric vehicles to be exported to China. He hadn't even heard of the American entrepreneur back then.
第一感觉啊，就这个人跟乔布斯有些相似，就是他们在商业、在做企业创业的这个出发点上，其实都有一个比较宏大的、比较大的一个目标，就是我们称之为他们是去思考那个大问题的人。 所以非常的特别。
Today, this decades-long fascination has become a business. After quitting his job in 2022, Mr. Liu started making Musk-related content online and sells merchandise on Chinese online platforms like Xiaohongshu. Mr. Liu says he earns millions of yuan a year.
他们有这样的一些需求吧，就是有些人也会经常问我们。 哎呀，能不能给我们做这个？能不能给我们做那个？我对这个感兴趣，我对那个感兴趣。我觉得这个东西国内现在比较缺，就做得好的、做得成体系的，确实也没有。我看到国外其实是有一些的，但我们，但对于国内的这部分群体来说，不是很方便。
Elon Musk has fascinated many Chinese netizens for years as his business interests in the country continue to grow. China is Tesla's second largest market behind the US, making up more than a third of its car sales worldwide. It sold a record more than 650,000 electric vehicles in China last year, bucking a global decline. This captivation with Musk is also seen offline, with fans obsessing over places he's visited during his numerous trips to the country, most recently in 2024. That includes this hot pot restaurant he visited in Beijing 6 years ago, which still continues to draw curious fans.
当时我们也不认识嘛，但是有认识他，可能他的粉丝也在我们这吃饭，就拍了一个视频放到微博上，好像是网上了吧。 然后后来就有人跟我们说，打电话过来说这你们吃饭啊。
During that 2019 trip, besides holding meetings with high-level Chinese officials, Musk also opened Tesla's Gigafactory in Shanghai, its largest in the world. This cozy relationship a contrast from the feisty rhetoric between officials in Beijing and Washington in the throes of a deepening trade war, something that didn't go unnoticed among his fans.
他对中国也贡献挺大的，帮助中国。
反正是一个我敬佩的人，思想比较前卫，前瞻性也很强，而且这个目标远大，相当于替人类达到一个人类的高度了。
The latest development that has got fans talking is Musk's foray into politics. The hashtag "How much influence does Musk have on the Trump administration?" trending on Chinese social media, with netizens expressing mixed views about this. Analysts are also uncertain over how much influence he would have in his new role in the Trump administration.
Challenges of US-China are quite deep-seated and they are structural, so no single one man can play a singularly decisive role. Having said that, there is certainly, I think, a space for him to play a part, maybe even a private intermediary. And I think that even if this role does materialize, it will be quite specific in the tech, in science sectors in relation to China.
It won't be long before this becomes clear, as the Trump administration gets ready to take office on January 20th.
Well, for more on China's fascination with Elon Musk, CNA's Lauren Ong joins us live from Beijing. Lauren, I guess it won't be long before we find out how Musk is going to fit into Trump's new administration, but what do Chinese fans think about that?
Well, I'll tell you, there's been mixed reviews so far. So first off, Elon Musk, he's a household name in China. Many know Tesla. He's been making headlines frequently, and there's always a buzz whenever he visits China. So these are interactions that really set him apart from the Trump team that's full of China hawks. They hear about these new cabinet picks saying that they want to curb investments in China, but they see Musk, on the other hand, doing the opposite. So there's some optimism that he could bring some benefits to China. But speaking to some of these Chinese fans, not every one of them is actually likes that he is venturing to politics. Some actually say that they see him as first and foremost as an entrepreneur, and they hope that he stays that way. So to get a sense of what they think, let's have a listen.
其实去参与到政治和这些里面，肯定会分散他的精力，也未见得就是一个非常他擅长的事情。
他那边的科技做好了，我觉得对咱们中国的这个很多科技企业也是一个鼓励吧。
对于我们中国来说，也是一个好事。毕竟他对中国会非常友好，而且在中国的投资也比较大。他应该比较了解中国的文化。应该对于中国和美国的这个关系的话，应该是比较好的。
Well, there are also analysis video circulating on Chinese social media about what role he can play when the incoming Trump leadership comes into power. And a lot of this are on the potential that Musk can bring in thawing US-China relations. And we've already seen some early signs that Musk can potentially shake up the bipartisan consensus on the US stance on China policy. In December, we see that the Democrats accusing Republicans for protecting his Chinese investments, saying that they are blocking a measure to regulate US investments in China. But still, some analysts say that this there is still sustained competition with China, and that this appetite to compete with China won't be unraveled so quickly.
All right, so, Musk has all these investments in China, not to mention he's got so many fans as well that we've just seen in your report. Is this then a trump card for US-Sino relations?
Well, Elon Musk fans in China span far and wide, but whether this adoration for him will be unwavering still remains to be seen. And a lot of it will depend on what he does when Trump goes into office and what he does during that time. Analysts say that so far he's been a somewhat inoffensive character, often praising Chinese workers for their work, as well as lauding that things can be done in China for better and cheaper. But we also have seen brands who have gone into trouble, for example, like Dolce & Gabbana for getting a blowback after making the wrong move. And most prominently in 2018, there was a controversial ad, and this offended Chinese consumers, and this triggered a boycott. And 7 years on, they're still trying to reel from that controversy and still trying to gain back popularity. But according to one analyst, he doesn't really see Musk experiencing this risk just yet. So let's have a listen.
Every country has its own unique set of political risks. But I do not see the sort of... I think the risk is manageable for Elon Musk's companies and brands. For some of the reasons that I've mentioned, he has always had a fairly inoffensive character. If he does what he has been doing so far, which fairly good relations with Chinese officials, saying all the right things, then I see no reason how and why his political risk to his companies would suddenly increase.
I'll be watching this space very closely. Elon Musk in the U.S. administration. Thank you so very much. CNA's Lauren Ong in Beijing. Meantime, a SpaceX Starship prototype has disintegrated in space just minutes after launching from Texas.
3, 2, 1.
Well, the latest test of the Starship, SpaceX's next-generation mega rocket, blasted off. Its first-stage booster was successfully caught in the so-called chopstick arms of its launch towers again. But the triumph was short-lived. Minutes later, teams had lost contact with the upper-stage vehicle. SpaceX issued a statement saying that the rocket had undergone a rapid unscheduled disassembly, which essentially means it exploded. The blast has forced airline flights over the Gulf of Mexico to alter course to avoid falling debris, some of which was spotted over Haiti. Flights were also temporarily grounded at Miami Airport in Florida. And just before we go, we turn to Japan, where sumo's top wrestler Teruno Fuji is retiring. Well, the announcement, which may not come as a surprise to fans, follows his Thursday withdrawal from an ongoing Grand Sumo tournament in Tokyo. Well, the 10-time top division championship winner has been plagued by injuries for a good part of his career. He once tumbled from the highest sumo tier to near the bottom, but recovered and rose back to the top in 2021. But the 33-year-old's injuries have worsened since. He set out more than half of the tournaments after his promotion to the top rank, but still managed to win 6 championship titles out of the 8 tournaments he fought. Teruno Fuji is the sport's yokozuna, or top-rank wrestler, and his retirement could leave the ancient sport without a yokozuna for the first time in more than 30 years. And on that note, we wrap up Friday's edition of East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for your company. Have a great weekend.